Last week, we talked all about getting ready to record solo episodes, some tools and tactics you can use to get primed and ready and really show up with the energy that you want to. And we talked about it because for a lot of people who have been podcasting guest only, the idea of stepping into solo episodes, even occasionally, can feel really overwhelming. The other side of this, though, is the content. And oftentimes, those who are feeling a little nervous about solo episodes are left feeling totally unsure of what to even talk about. And that's what we're going to dig into today. I'm going to share 3 places that you can get solo episode ideas in priority order. So stay tuned, get out your notebook, get ready to start taking notes, because this is going to be one you revisit right before your next content planning session. Let's get into it. Welcome to the More Profitable Podcast with Stacey Harris. I'm Stacey, and this is the spot to learn more about the strategies, tactics, and tools you need to build your more profitable podcast. My team and I work every day with podcasters like you to shift shows from frustrating time sucks to productive members of your sales team, because your show should be built to generate and convert leads. So let's get into it. This is going to be a good one, and I want to note that these are in the order they're in for a reason. For as long as I hear on social, most predominantly on social, from what I'm going to call faux content experts about how sites like Ask the Public are your never-ending content treasure trove, I'm going to talk about these 3 resources, and I'm going to talk about them in this order, and I'm going to allow for the space for us to talk about why these are better, because they are. So stay with me. I will occasionally get ranty and soapboxy, but like only in the most fun way. And when you're done, what's great about this is you are going to be able to sit down and honestly, in the matter of like an hour, build out 12 solo episodes you can do. I have zero doubt of that. So we're going to dig into these 3 things. We're going to talk about why they're in this order as we move through them. And you are going to start thinking through, because I'm willing to bet as early as option number 1, you're going to have something that pops into your brain that you're going to want to action. So get someplace, use your voice notes if you're driving, drop them in your project management software if you have it. We actually have an area on our podcast dashboards, ideas, and that's where things like this go. When I'm thinking of something or when I hear something and I know I want to talk about it, I will go jot it down, occasionally with a link to whatever inspired it so I can get back there when I need to. But I want you to make sure that you're putting those ideas someplace you can revisit them, because in your brain is not, in my experience, a safe place to store things when it comes to this stuff. So make sure you have someplace you can put those as you work through them. Before we dig in, we've got another Podcasting for Profitability Roundtable coming up very soon. Just a heads up, we will be pausing these for the summer. So if you want to join us for one before we hit late Q3, early Q4, now's your chance. If you've not joined us for one of these before, they are essentially Q&A time with me. So you sign up. I always suggest submitting your question because I prioritize them on the call. It just allows me to do a little looking around before we get on the call. Allows me to come with better quality answers, honestly. And then we'll actually talk through it on the call. You'll be able to respond to me. I'll be able to ask follow-up questions, which is often imperative in giving you an actually good answer and not a general, super generic one. And so make sure you head over to uncommonlymore.com/roundtable, reserve your spot, submit your question, and join me on our next call. With all of that, let's dig in. I want to start with this first one because it is the most important one. This is the one you should start with first. And the reason for that is because these are the people who best represent who you want to be talking to. And that's the clients already paying you. The first place I go when I am looking to build out my content plan. Now, for me, I say build out my content plan because 99% of this show is solo, right? That same may not be true for you. So even if you're not doing 12 solo episodes a quarter. Maybe you're doing 6. Maybe you're doing 4. Whatever that looks like, this is the place I want you to go to first to get those ideas. Because these are the people you want to be attracting. These are the people who you want to be speaking to. These are the people who have already invested, and we want more like them. I will say, if you have somebody on your client list right now who you maybe don't want more of, maybe don't include their questions. I get that. We've all taken a client, and many of us, whether we know it have been the client that someone took who was maybe not totally a fit. And it doesn't mean that they're a bad client. It doesn't mean that you guys don't get along. It doesn't mean that you don't do good work together. This has looked like for me, I still have one client from my virtual assistant days. She has been with me for 12 years, 11 years. 11 years. We've worked together 11 years. When I go to do my content planning, I don't review my conversations with her. I don't review the emails she sent me. I don't review our conversations because I actually don't need more of her. I'm good. She's there for as long as she wants to be there because I adore her, but she's not who I'm prioritizing when I'm making content. And so, again, this doesn't always mean you don't like the person. You may love this person. I adore this woman. Again, I will continue to work with her until she no longer needs me to work with her, which she's retiring, will be very soon. But I adore her, and so it's fine. So again, this is not inherently bad. Don't put yourself in this like, well, that's mean. No, it's not mean. It is clear. It is understanding where you're going, regardless of where you are or where you've been. Especially if you're somebody who's transitioned their business model or transitioned how they work with their clients, this may be more difficult because you don't have as much depth in this place. However, for a lot of the people I talk to, they're not dissimilar from me in the sense that they've been doing this for a little while. We've been doing this podcast production thing. We've been running the agency for 5 years now. And so the questions from my clients are mostly really valuable in us building content here because I would love to work with more of them. And so the first place I'm going to is not the client. I almost got you there, right? No, I'm going to our call recordings. So often we hear about going and talking to our clients and getting information from our clients, and it sort of puts the onus on them, right? It puts the burden, hey, what would you like me to talk about? I don't know. We're just handing responsibility over to them for our idea creation at this point. That's not helpful. What is helpful is to go to the resources we have from them. So where do you handle communication with your clients? Do they submit a form? And maybe they're completing a Google form. Maybe they're filling out some sort of form in your project or in your CRM, Maybe they have something they do in your project management software. Maybe it's a Slack channel. Maybe it is a circle community or a Facebook group or email. Could absolutely be email. For me, I love going through my client call recordings. So I use a tool called Fathom. I'll put a link in the show notes to it. And we record, it's a note taker. It's got some AI stuff in it. It sends me a breakdown. But what it allows me to do is search those conversations. And oftentimes what I'll do is I will actually search my answers. Because I'll be like, man, I said this a lot this week. So I will search sort of roughly what is said, a few words from that I have repeated over and over again, and just see all of the calls where I said that. And I'm like, oh, okay. Then I can look at the ways they ask the questions. And oftentimes, I'll be honest, they also look a lot alike because your girl works with ideal clients. But sometimes they don't look like how I would have asked it. And this is where the real gold is, right? Because if I can get to the same point, but never actually use the words they're using to describe the question, to describe the problem, they're probably not going to ever take in the answer. or at least connect the answer with their problem because they're looking at it differently. And so being able to see their words, being able to see their phrasing, being able to see how they respond to my answer. What are the follow-up questions? Because oftentimes something like an answer to the public will give you question 1. It'll give you something super basic and general to answer. But where the real gold is, where the real impact is in the back and forth that follows up that question. Where you start to get specific, where you start to talk about nuance, where you start to get really clear on what the actual answer to their actual question is, and not the generic answer anybody could Google and get in the little info box at the top of the screen. And when you work with a targeted niche, when you have an ideal client, when you have a specific group you help solve a specific problem for, general is not going to help you. Nuance is going to help you because there's a lot of people giving general answers because they speak to a general group. Setting yourself apart happens in the nuance, and that happens from looking at those client conversations. So when we look at these client conversations, we're getting the questions people already invested with us have. We're getting the language they use. And we're getting the nuance we need for our content to speak to our niche and not the general public. Do you see why it's first? This is why it's my favorite. So go to your old call recordings. Go through old call transcripts. Transcripts would be a great way to speed this process up, by the way. Go through, again, your communications, whether it's email or project management software, or maybe you're somebody who's running courses or a membership, and that might be in Circle or in Facebook group or in wherever else membership platforms are putting the community elements these days. I don't know. I don't run one, right? Go to those places and start getting those questions that are already coming from the people who are already paying you. The next category is group that is not already paying you, but they are a group who have actioned in some way. And that's because they've gotten on sales calls with you. So the number 2 place I go to look for questions is my sales conversations. So this might be, again, using Fathom, call recordings of sales calls. More often, it is the questions submitted in the application to book the call with me, or in the email conversations I've had with a prospect, either in follow-up or in their initial reach out. But these are clients who may or may not have converted, but I need to know what their questions were when they were thinking about hiring me. And so when I'm talking about educating into a sale, this is what I'm talking about. These are the questions I want to answer. Again, answer the public or top 10 content idea blog posts are not going to give you the specificity, the nuance, and the honest look at where they're at. And so if you're not currently recording your sales calls, I highly recommend doing it. Also, it's just as like a sales strategy, sales tip on the side here. It's a really good way to get better at sales calls is to review it. There's a reason athletes review game tape, musicians review, performances and recordings of their work. It's how we get better, right? We can see what we liked, what we didn't like, etc. I also use them as a way to get content ideas, because if I get a question from 5 prospects about the podcast strategy intensive that I've never addressed in content over the course of a month, it's time to address that in content, right? This episode is a great example of this. This conversation is something that happens frequently on sales calls. And so I wanted to have an asset. I wanted to have an element that I could send people as a follow-up. Hey, I know this came up in the course of our conversation. Here's a really good episode to get my perspective on how we do this. Here's one of the places we'll look, whatever that may be. What's going to be really funny is when someone comes to listen to this episode because I sent it to them in this. It happens sometimes and it's funny every time. Anyways, I want you to be looking at these sales conversations in 2 buckets. One, people who did convert. And again, we're going to prioritize those for the same reason that we prioritized client conversations before this. We want to prioritize those sales calls that converted and answering those questions first because, again, they're most like the questions coming from our ideal clients, from the people who we want to work with. The second category is people who did not convert. And the reality is people don't convert for lots of reasons. Chief amongst them, timing, in my opinion. They weren't ready to buy. Whether they know it or not, they weren't ready to buy. I have absolutely had instances where a client was like, it's not for me right now. It's not, I can't do it. And they had reasons. 3 to 6 months later, it was the right time because their readiness did come up. They did get there. It just didn't convert the first time we had that conversation. And so I'm not going to disregard those sales calls because sometimes it's just timing. And we all know when a sales call is like, oh, that was actually just a poor fit. Those are not sales calls I'm pulling questions from. They are sales calls I'm looking at to see if there's anything I could have spoken to that would have allowed that person to see our poor fit earlier. And so I actually had one of these recently. So we had a person interested in working with us. The goals of their show were not the kind of show we produce. Doesn't mean it's bad. Doesn't mean they're bad. Doesn't mean the show's bad. It's just not what we do. It's as simple as that. And so what this brought up was, oh, okay, I want to be more clear about the way we work, how we work with clients, what that process looks like. And so one of the things I'm going to be doing in the next couple of months is building out a process series that I'll be able to share with people. I haven't decided yet if it's going to go on the private podcast or the public podcast. I'll decide that downstream. But this was a really good insight I would not have had from a sales call that did convert, right? And so notice we're still looking at them. We're just looking at them different and we're giving them a different weight, right? We're not building content that attracts poor fit sales calls. But what we are doing is going, cool, what didn't work here? Is there a way I can help people understand that sooner? Again, for these calls where buyer readiness is a concern, where they're a no and then 3, 6, sometimes 12, sometimes even like 2 years later, they come and they're like, oh, the offer is different now, or the whatever, or they're just ready, whatever that looks like. I'll go back and look at their first call and I'll look at their second call and I go, okay, what changed here? Did they have different information? Did they come to the call differently? How can I help future prospects identify that readiness in themselves through content? And that's what I'm building it for. So that's why we're looking at this second. This, for me, the second category is the place where we're most directly getting sales content. Because I'm looking at objections. I'm looking at questions. I'm looking at where they needed clarity. I'm looking at concerns. I'm also looking at the things they're most excited about. How can I highlight those things? How can we be speaking to those pieces more on the podcast? Same is true of my clients. What are the things 6 months, a year into working together that they're actually most excited about? Now, is it different than the things they were most excited about when they signed the contract? Because that's going to allow me to see, do I need to be speaking to the person a year into working with me or the person who is just considering working with me? And maybe it's both, but I need to present them in different ways. But notice not once have I gone to Google and said, what should I talk about? And here I am with a lot of educational assets, value that helps educate the listener into understanding the values of our work, both from a monetary value and also the how we look at this and how we approach this and how we show up kind of values. There's so much here. The third container, the third bucket, the third place I go to when I want content ideas, specifically for solo episodes, I'm gonna bang the drum a little bit here as far as a rant. This one's third for a reason. It's your audience or your followers on like social media, your email list. Essentially, people who have not raised their hand in any way to learn more about working with you. So this is where I'll put up a story on Instagram and say, hey, I'm getting ready to record some new episodes. What are your biggest podcast questions? Because we all know we always rush to answer those, right? Or, honest, full transparency, this is the version of this that happens most frequently for me. It'll be questions in my Instagram DMs. Questions in my LinkedIn inbox. Questions that come in via the email. From people who I've not talked to directly, I haven't worked with before, whatever. The reason these sit third is not because these people are less valuable, but they're the furthest away from our goal. Meaning, my goal of you working with me and your goal of you seeing the results you want to be seeing from your podcast. They're the furthest away. Again, not bad. Doesn't mean they're less valuable, but it does mean that their questions come from a different perspective. It also means their questions are looking for a different outcome. When I get a question on a sales call from somebody who's actively looking to work with me potentially, the goal of their answer is to decide whether they should work with me or not. When I'm getting a question from somebody in my Instagram DMs, the goal of their question is to solve their immediate discomfort. Right? They're looking to comfort the symptom, not solve the disease. And that's a very dramatic way of me putting this. But it's the best example I've got in my mind right now, right? We want to scratch the itch and get the release. We don't want to solve the problem that would prevent the itch from happening. That's what I find most often is the difference. And I don't want this podcast to be about scratching an itch, because that's not valuable for either of us. It just puts us in a loop of having to go and revisit the same itch. What I want us to do is solve the underlying problem that was causing the itch so that we can move on to the next itch. Because there's always a next itch, right? There's always a next problem to solve. And if we stay in this loop of having to solve problem one over and over and over and over and over again, which is what happens when we only address symptoms, we're never going to get to problem 2 and problem 3 and problem 4. And just because we never go looking for problem 2, 3, and 4 doesn't mean that problem 2, 3, and 4 are not there while we stay in this endless loop with problem 1. And that is not what I want to create here. What I want to create here is a place where we go, okay, I get it. Here's what I need to do to solve problem 1, and now problem 2, and now problem 3, so that we can keep moving forward. And the reality is problem 2, 3, and 4 are most likely solved by working with you. And it could be as clean lined as, this example would like it to be, which is problem 1 is solved with a podcast, and problem 2 is solved with your email opt-in, and problem 3 is your low price offer, and that's probably not how it goes. It's probably not that neat and tidy. But if we stay in a loop of just dealing with problem 1 temporarily, we're never going to be able to see the growth they want to see. We're never going to see real change. We're never going to see transformation. And so, yes, we will occasionally need to and want to grab questions from this third bucket where we're looking at our Instagram DMs and we're people who have asked questions on LinkedIn, or, they submitted questions to us on an Instagram story or whatever it is. We may occasionally go to this bucket, but it will never be prioritized because it is the farthest away from being ready to work with us. And when we start building stuff, our clients want to know. Our warmest leads want to know. That's when we build conversion content. When we're consistently building content that people who have yet to pay us want answers to, we keep them in that place. And when new people find our show, they end up in that place. Even if they were pretty ready to buy, pretty ready to solve their problem, we can actually move them back in buyer readiness if we spend a lot of time distracting them with answers to questions that keep them stuck in their symptom and not addressing the problem. All right? Again, there's a reason we order these the way they are. And so when you're going through this work, I want you to literally look at these in this order. I want you to review your client calls. I want you to review your sales calls. Then, if you even still need content, which you might not ever get to this bucket, and that's cool too. But if you exhaust everything this quarter from those first two buckets and you end up in that third bucket, make sure that you're answering the questions in a way that moves them forward. Which may mean calling them out a little, which might feel uncomfortable, which may mean sharing an unpopular opinion. Like, that's not really a problem or the problem. A great example of this is, and I will link it in the show notes, but there is an episode we did of this show called Why You May Be Standing in the Way of Your Podcast Growth, or the title is roughly that. But basically it was like, hi, you're the problem, it's you. To absolutely butcher a Taylor Swift lyric. You might be in the uncomfortable position of highlighting to them that their question is the problem. Because they're asking the wrong question. And you should do this as nicely as possible, honestly. But you should also do it as honestly as possible. Because that's imperative. All right, I'm going to put my soapbox away safely for the day. Mostly because now I want you to go take action. I want you to go look at these assets. Look at these things that you have. And start putting together 4 or 6 or 12, solo episode ideas that you can do in the next 12 weeks. And then I want you to record them and release them. The whole thing. I want you to do all of that. If you've got these content ideas together and you're like, I don't know. What does this even look like? Is this helpful? How do I make this a whole episode? That one actually comes up a lot. You're like, okay, this is a 3-minute answer. This is exactly the kind of conversations we have in our podcast strategy intensive. This has been a lot. And again, working example of looking at your client stuff. This is something that we've been talking a lot about in podcast strategy intensives this year so far. And so if this is a struggle, if this is feeling difficult still, podcast strategy intensive is a really great first step, because in there we can do this work together. We can also start to outline these episodes so that you can move into recording and getting these out in the world so that you can start seeing the impact of them, because I will tell you that will get you to do them faster than anything else will. Is getting that feedback, hearing from your audience. It's incredible. And I cannot wait for you to try this. So if you want to grab a podcast strategy intensive spot, head over to uncommonlymore.com/intensive, book a conversation with me. We'll make sure it's the right fit. And then we'll get you on my calendar. I'm so stoked to do it. Again, uncommonlymore.com/intensive to learn more. And I will see you right back here next week. Bye. Thanks so much for listening to the show. Remember that content consumption does not make changes. So commit to doing something from today's episode. Maybe it's taking action on what we talked about. Maybe it's reaching out to me and learning more about podcast strategy intensives or what podcast production looks like with our team. All of that is over at uncommonlymore.com. And if you haven't yet signed up for the podcast newsroom, I want to remind you that is a great next step. If you're not really sure what comes next, hang out over there. get those exclusive private episodes. That's over at podcastnewsroom.com. And the last favor I will ask, because social proof is endlessly important for sure, is to leave a rating or review for the show. If you go to ratethispodcast.com/more, that's the easiest way to do it. But I would love to hear what you thought of the show, what you think of the show, and if the show has been helpful for you. I can't wait to chat with you. So this is just the start of the conversation. Reach out so we can keep it going. Talk soon.